One.
Hey guys, Brendan Ciprianis here, and basically what we're going to talk about today is we're going to talk about onboarding and orientation, okay? Now, with onboarding and orientation, a couple things that you have to think about. The first thing is the higher quality onboarding and orientation that you run, the better people you're going to attract, right? If one of my first things when I was a rookie owner is I started the business, I got into ownership, we didn't have any structure, there was no like orientation, so I'd hire people and we'll just go straight into day one training, right? Go into day one and we'll do like a quick 10-minute orientation. And I'll do that 10-minute orientation. And one thing I realized was that people would get into like the field by Wednesday, Thursday, and they'll be like super confused about the pay. They'll be confused about like the growth structure. They'll be confused about a bunch of different stuff. So what I did is, I think my business account was at $8,000. This was 7 months into running an office and I wasn't doing well at all. So I took a trip down to Amani's office, right? I got down to Amani's office and I kept hearing that, hey, her orientation is like the real deal. So I was like, okay, cool. So I'm gonna go steal Amani's orientation, see if it works or if not. Now for perspective, that was in November of 2022. Right now the date is, it's March of 2025. We're at 12 offices in New York, about 150 people. And I think the org where I last week did about 97,000. So just for perspective, from that day, we kind of saw a huge change, and a lot of it was really because of this, the onboarding and the orientation, right? So basically, honestly, it's not mine, stole it from Amani, so I'm just gonna run through it with you guys, okay? So the first thing is you really have to understand when it comes to like onboarding and orientation is the better onboarding you can run, the more sharp people you can retain, right? The more sharp people you can retain, typically what will happen is those people are typically easier to train. And those people who are easier to train are easier to get into leadership, and those people can lead more people. Those people can get into ownership. Those people can actually help you grow your organization. So understand that this is where it all starts, right? So understanding how to run a really, really good orientation is super, super important. Okay. So with the orientation, few things that I think is important to just know and understand is the fact that the reason why people quit this job 9 times out of 10 is because of skepticism, right? People come in and they're super skeptical about the job. They're like, oh my God, is this a pyramid scheme? Is this a multi-level marketing company? Like, why do we pay the way we do? So hashing all of that stuff out, understanding that our generation, we really genuinely appreciate transparency, right? So the more transparent you can be on the front end, the more you can tell people about the positives, about the negatives of the job, the more chances you have of retaining people, right? And when you can retain more people, you can grow your offices at a really, really quicker rate. Okay, so we'll just go through the first thing when it comes to orientation, right? So when it comes to orientation, a really important thought process is you're selling the company. Okay, you're selling the company as well as you're selling yourself, right? So one thing we probably don't speak about a lot is charisma. You need to have charisma in the orientation, right? I know charisma is one of those things that's hard to duplicate, but the orientation kind of needs to be really fun and really cool, right? If you run the orientation and you're just kind of reading from a script and you're like super, super boring, at the end of the day, you won't retain a lot of people because people start the job and people stay at the job because of other people, right? So they need to at least at the bare minimum like you. Yeah, so first thing you have to understand, you gotta be funny. You gotta be yourself when it comes to orientation, right? Second thing you really need to make sure that you do is that you need to understand that when you're running orientation, you're running it for specific people, right? 9 times out of 10, there'll be, depending on the size market you are, if you're in a smaller size market, you might have like 1 or 2 people in your orientation. If you're in a bigger size market, you could have like 10 people in your orientation, right? The reality is when it comes to running that orientation, there's going to be a few people in that room that you're really trying to target, you're really trying to retain, you're really actually trying to keep so that you can actually grow your business, right? So you're not running the orientation for every single person. So for example, when you're doing introductions, like the sharp people, you want to ask them more questions. You're like, hey, okay, you went to George Mason. What did you study? No, you did. You know what I mean, right? But if they're just like a Huey, Dewey, or Louie, you just keep it going. Okay, cool, nice, yeah. And then so that needs to be your thought process, right? Understand that what we're doing is we're recruiting. Orientation is a big part of the recruiting process, okay? So just a couple of specifics with the orientation, right? I hope this video stays alive to when we're still W2 employees. So the first thing you need to do is you need to make sure that they fill out their the W4 forms, okay? Right, obviously, they need to do their background. They should have done their background check prior to coming in, but they need to make sure that they fill out their W4 forms, okay? Now, a couple things with the W4. Legally, we're not allowed to help them out with this, right? So make sure that if they are still like, hey, do I put this here? Because of tax reasons and tax purposes, we're not legally allowed to help them out. So make sure that when they're actually filling out their W4, that they just fill it out, right? They have access to these documents 9 times as soon as it's done through Blue Ink, so you have access to these documents at all points in times, right? Other thing you want to make sure that they fill out is their I-9. I know when I started off, I didn't know what I-9 was. I didn't know what a W4 was, right? W4 for tax purposes, I-9 more for identification purposes, right? So what they need to have is 2 forms of ID. And with the 2 forms of ID, if you look through the I-9 sheet, on the second page, it will tell you what they need to do. So it'll say like, hey, US passport is on list A, Social Security is on list B, and then something else is on list C. So they can either do B or C, or A and B, or A and C. Okay, so really important, just make sure that you have that down when you guys asking you questions, because I know when I opened up, they were like, yo, so what do I fill out here? And I was like, I don't know, you just fill it out. You have 2 forms, right? And that was kind of the whole thought process there. So make sure they fill that out. This filling out of I-9 is really important because when you're processing payroll, typically, which will be the following Tuesday or Wednesday around there, you will need information from this, right? So you don't want to be that owner who doesn't get them to fill out their I-9, then you're having to call them and you're running late on payroll and you're like, yo, Amber, I'm sorry, I cooked it and I fucked up, right? So really important, just make sure that we always get that down, right? So once they fill out the W4 and I-9s, the quicker you can do this, the quicker you can actually get into the actual orientation, right? And how you want to start off the orientation is really important. This is going to be EDM/India specific. If the client is AT&T, they're going to have some documents that they'll need to fill out, right? The documents are really straightforward. They all come from this place called Impact Info. Now with Impact Info, don't quote me on this, I'm just going to run through a couple of things, but some things they talk about there is they have this thing called FTC compliance, right? The other thing they have is like device protection. There's also wireless knowledge check. If I'm not mistaken, there's ADD training. And then I think it's like just overall compliance stuff, okay? Now, a couple of things. You want to make sure that you write this down. You write it down as Impact Info. Mistake I see a lot of people make is they'll just write this down and they want to explain this. And then they'll say, hey, do this for homework, right? You want to make sure that people fully understand what the heck this Impact Info is. If you're on HR, if you're on Primo, just don't worry about this. But basically so you have to understand the word third party, right? So as a third party, we don't work for the client, but we do represent the client. So when you represent the client, what that really means is that most of the training that's going to be done is going to be in-house, right? We're going to train the people on how to do the job, right? There's not going to be a person from AT&T who's going to be like, hey, this is how you sell the phone. No, we're going to do the training. But from a legality standpoint, AT&T needs to make sure that you as a representative, you as a distributor have to actually complete these documents here. So with the FTC compliance, I like to just run through this, just explain what a lot of it is. Look, a lot of it is pretty straightforward. FTC compliance stands for Federal Trade Commission compliance. Obviously, that's, I don't know what the fuck that is, but anyway. Device protection. If you see here, I don't write AT&T. I see a lot of people write AT&T device protection, AT&T wireless knowledge check, AT&T compliance, right? Trying to avoid writing AT&T, or AT&T, but trying to avoid writing AT&T next to it. The reasoning and the thought process behind that is because you don't want people coming and think it's like an AT&T sales job, right? So you just want to write this down and explain it. Device protection, pretty fucking straightforward. Wireless knowledge check, make sure that they understand that they have to get 100%, but kind of make a joke out of that, because at the end of the day, it's like 25 questions, you have to get 100%, but at the end of the day, you can take the test as many times as you like. So if you can't get 100%, you're I'm not going to say it because it's on camera. ADD training, avoid, deny, defend. I always make the joke of like, hey, if an active shooter were to come into a retail location, this is what you do, right? Personally, I'd run, but there's a 12-minute video of what you should do. So just make sure that you understand how to break this down. Take the time to read over them, because when you take the time to read over them, you're a little bit more educated. And if people ask you questions on the things, there's a higher percentage of you actually understanding what it is, right? So after you do the W4, the I-9, you explain this. Next thing you want to go over is the intro, okay? Right, so you want to make sure that you introduce everyone who's in the room, right? It shouldn't be weird, it shouldn't be awkward. I asked a couple questions, first name, last name, where you from, what you did before this, and then also one interesting fact about you, right? However you want to play that, that's completely up to you. The key thing though, if you're the person who's running the orientation, regardless if you're an assistant director, a junior director, a new owner, marketing director, experience, whatever the case is, when you're running the orientation, your intro needs to be extremely powerful, right? In the sense that you have to have, just like a second round interview, which we'll tackle on another day, but you want to have at least 2 wow factors, right? 2 things that when they hear you and they hear your introduction, they're like, holy shit, right? For me, it's really easy. It's like, yeah, I have a degree and I'm from Zimbabwe. Both of them don't give a shit, but to other people, they'll give a shit, right? So it's really important to just make sure that your intro is really powerful. And yeah, from there, pretty much you'll get into the orientation. Yeah.